In just 47 seconds, the earth shook, and an entire nation changed forever. Streets collapsed into rubble, homes disappeared, and millions were left with nothing but dust and silence. Once known for golden temples and gentle smiles, Myanmar is now a chaotic maze of debris, despair, and survival, where children sleep in muddy alleys and middle-class families beg for spoiled rice. In this travel documentary, we go beyond the headlines. When a country loses everything, shelter, order, even hope, what remains of its humanity? Are we witnessing a collapse or the beginning of something new? Number 1. From peace to uncertainty. Myanmar, once a land bathed in golden light, where ancient pagodas touched the sky and morning prayers echoed softly through the mist. Place where time seemed to slow down and life moved gently with the rhythm of the Irrawaddy River. Monks in saffron robes walked barefoot at dawn, their bowls empty but their hearts full, collecting rice and blessings in equal measure. Children laughed along the banks, chasing paper boats on rain puddles, while elders gathered under banyan trees, sipping tea and trading old folk tales. But in the blink of an eye, all of that changed. In March of the year 2025, at precisely 3:47 in the morning, Myanmar was struck by one of the most powerful earthquakes in its recorded history. The tremor, measuring 7.9 on the Richter scale, didn't just shake buildings. It shattered lives, cracked open the ground beneath people's feet, and tore apart everything that once felt certain. For 72 seconds, the earth groaned like it was breaking open from within. Tiles fell like raindrops. Sacred bells from centuries-old temples shattered on stone floors, and then silence. A silence so loud it seemed to swallow the stars. Since that moment, the country has been struggling to rise from the rubble, not just physically, but emotionally and socially. This isn't just a story about an earthquake. It's a story about what happens after the headlines fade, after the world looks away. Over 150,000 people were displaced. Nearly 70% of critical infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, and roads, was either severely damaged or completely destroyed. In one village, the only remaining structure was a half-buried Buddha statue, its eyes closed as if in mourning. Relief efforts have been slow to reach remote regions, and for many families, hope feels farther away than ever. In this journey, we're going to explore what life in Myanmar really looks like after the dust has settled, but not through shock or fear, through truth, through the voices of people who are still living the consequences every single day. We'll dive deep into 3 powerful realities that define the new Myanmar. A crumbling environment where the basics of hygiene and safety are no longer guaranteed, a chaotic struggle for order in a place where systems have broken down, and a housing crisis so severe that entire communities now live under makeshift tarps or out in the open, unsure of what tomorrow will bring. So let's begin not with numbers or headlines, but with the heartbeat of a nation caught between survival and silence. This is Myanmar, after the quake. Number 2. The quake that split time. At the start of the year 2025, Myanmar was struck by a powerful earthquake that would forever mark the nation's timeline. It wasn't just a tremor beneath the surface, it was a breaking point, a moment that split before from after. The quake, measured at 7.9 on the Richter scale, rippled through the heart of the country with unimaginable force. Cities like Mandalay and Naypyidaw were rocked, rural villages collapsed in seconds, entire neighborhoods turned into fields of rubble. It lasted less than a minute, but left behind a trail of destruction that will take decades to repair. In the dead of night, entire families were jolted from sleep. children screaming, walls cracking, dishes crashing to the floor. A mother in Maulamian said, "We ran barefoot into the dark. I didn't even have time to grab my baby's bottle." The ground didn't just shake, it heaved, like a beast twisting beneath the soil. Roads split apart like torn fabric. Telephone poles sparked and fell. Cries for help echoed in the darkness, overlapping like a chorus of fear. And while buildings fell, it was the invisible damage that cut even deeper. Experts say the true toll of the earthquake goes far beyond collapsed structures. Dr. Lin Mong, a regional geoscientist, shared, "This wasn't just a physical disaster, it was a psychological one. For many, it changed the way they look at the world and at life." In fact, according to the Myanmar Disaster Response Authority, more than 170,000 people were displaced from their homes. Over 2,000 schools were rendered unusable. 800 medical facilities, from city hospitals to rural clinics, were either partially damaged or completely destroyed. Entire classrooms were reduced to chalk dust. At one site in Shan State, only the rusted school bell remained, lying silent on a broken step. What truly haunts survivors is the silence that came after. The silence of a child no longer laughing, of a town square that once bustled with life, now echoing with emptiness. The silence of waiting, for help, for answers, for something to feel normal again. One survivor, Daw Hein Wai, recounted sitting alone in the ruins of her home, staring at a photo of her late husband covered in ash. "The house is gone," she said softly, "but I stayed. I had nowhere else to go." For many Myanmar citizens, that morning was not just a natural disaster. It was the beginning of a new reality, one shaped by loss, uncertainty, and a long road ahead. And yet, this is only the beginning of our story, because what came next was a struggle not just to rebuild, but to simply survive. Number 3. Life in the aftermath. If there's one thing that changed overnight after the earthquake, it was the environment people were forced to live in. In many towns and villages, the most basic systems that keep life moving, water, sanitation, and waste management, simply stopped working. With pipelines shattered and sewage systems broken beyond repair, clean water became a luxury. Piles of trash, once collected daily, now lined the streets for weeks. Without proper disposal, garbage mixed with debris and rainwater, turning entire neighborhoods into breeding grounds for disease. And yet, no one complained. Because when you've lost your home, your job, and your sense of security, surviving the smell becomes a secondary problem. The Myanmar Public Health Watch reported that within just 10 days of the disaster, over 40,000 people were at risk of waterborne illnesses, from diarrhea to skin infections due to the lack of clean water and proper hygiene facilities. Emergency toilets were scarce, and in some areas families had to share one bathroom with more than 50 people. But rather than give in to despair, something remarkable happened. Communities came together. In a village just outside of Bago, residents built their own temporary filtration system using charcoal, sand, and bamboo. In another region, local teachers organized rotating shifts to help children bathe using collected rainwater. One mother shared, "We may not have clean tiles or modern plumbing, but we do what we can for our children and for each other." It's moments like these, quiet acts of resilience, that shine brighter than any statistic. Because while the environment around them had collapsed into chaos, the people of Myanmar began to build something even more powerful: solidarity. And this spirit of survival didn't stop at sanitation, because when order fades, chaos creeps in, and that is where we're headed next. In the days immediately following the earthquake, Myanmar was not just dealing with the ruins of buildings, it was also grappling with the unraveling of daily life. With roads cracked open, bridges collapsed, and communication lines down, aid struggled to get through. Relief trucks were delayed for days. In some regions, helicopters were the only way supplies could be dropped, and even then, weather and access made it unpredictable. What followed wasn't violence, it was desperation. When food, water, and medicine are in short supply, and no one knows when help will arrive, panic sets in. Shelves emptied, tents filled, lines for basic needs stretched further than the eye could see. As one local volunteer put it, people weren't angry, they were scared. Everyone was trying to protect their families, their elders, their babies. It felt like we were all holding our breath, waiting. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported that, within the first 72 hours, nearly 100,000 people in central Myanmar had limited or no access to emergency supplies. In many cases, villages had to rely entirely on what they already had or what they could share. But here's where something extraordinary happened. Instead of turning on each other, many communities turned toward one another. In a remote area near Magway, farmers opened their rice stores to neighboring villages. In the outskirts of Mandalay, monks transformed monasteries into temporary shelters, offering food and calm to anyone who walked through their gates. Young people, many still in shock themselves, organized small delivery groups to bring basic supplies to the elderly and disabled. International aid organizations, including the Red Cross and Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, also stepped in quickly. Though access was difficult, their teams brought essential medicine, mobile clinics, and trauma counselors to areas most affected. One volunteer from the Global Response Coalition said, "The conditions were tough, but the people made it possible. Their willingness to work together gave us the strength to keep going." Yes, the days were chaotic, the nights were uncertain, but in the middle of all that noise, the most powerful sound was still the same: human voices helping other human beings. And through it all, there was one thing everyone needed, more than food, more than medicine, a place to call home. Which brings us to the final piece of this picture: what happens when a roof is no longer a guarantee? One of the hardest realities after the earthquake wasn't just the loss of homes, it was the uncertainty of where to go next. Thousands of families across Myanmar were forced to leave behind what little they had left: cracked walls, broken rooftops, unstable foundations. In many cases, entire neighborhoods were deemed unsafe, and people had no choice but to evacuate. Some moved into crowded temporary shelters, often made from tarps and bamboo. Others slept in open fields, schoolyards, or even under bridges, waiting for the day they could be resettled. The Myanmar Ministry of Reconstruction reported that nearly 200,000 individuals, including over 70,000 children, were living in transitional housing zones by the second month after the quake. But amid the hardship, something beautiful emerged. Many of these makeshift communities weren't just places to sleep, they became hubs of kindness, cooperation, and shared strength. People who had never met before became like family. Neighbors pooled supplies, young people built makeshift kitchens. Elders told stories by candlelight to help children fall asleep. Let me tell you about one family, the Dawthan family from the outskirts of Sagang. Before the quake, they lived in a small but sturdy wooden house. It wasn't much, but it was home. After the earthquake, the house collapsed completely while they were out visiting relatives. They returned to find nothing but splinters, but they didn't give up. With the help of local volunteers, they built a tent from plastic sheets and bamboo poles. They started cooking meals for other displaced families nearby. The father, Yuko Fan, found work helping dig latrines for a community relief center. The mother, Dao Mi, began teaching children under a tree from their old home. When asked how they were doing, Dao Mi smiled and said, "We have no walls, but we have each other. And that's enough for now." That kind of strength, that kind of spirit, it can't be measured in numbers. It's the soul of a people who refuse to be broken, even when everything around them falls apart. And that's the heartbeat of post-quake Myanmar. They may have lost their homes, but not their hope. And as we step into the final part of this journey, we'll explore how the world is responding and why what happens next matters more than ever. When disaster strikes, the first question everyone asks is, who will help us now? In Myanmar's darkest hours, the answer began to take shape, slowly at first, but with growing strength and determination. Within just 48 hours of the earthquake, emergency response teams from both the Myanmar government and international humanitarian groups began mobilizing. Roads were blocked, communications were down, but the intention was clear: help was coming. At the Emergency Command Center in Naypyidaw, volunteers worked through the night under candlelight, sorting rice sacks, logging names, checking maps of isolated villages by hand when digital systems failed. The Ministry of Social Welfare, Relief, and Resettlement coordinated the first wave of national aid, focusing on food, water, and medical supplies. Meanwhile, international organizations like the United Nations, the Red Cross, World Vision, and Save the Children launched parallel efforts, setting up emergency shelters, dispatching trauma care units, and delivering life-saving equipment to the most affected zones. It wasn't perfect. It was never going to be. Some areas were too remote to reach right away. Logistics were delayed. Resources were stretched thin. In one mountain village near Hipsau, aid didn't arrive for 5 days, and yet, when it came, villagers greeted the volunteers with tea and wildflowers. But one thing was clear: the commitment to rebuild was real. As one field coordinator from the International Federation of Red Cross said, "We are not here just to respond. We are here to stay, to help communities recover, not just survive." According to a United Nations Humanitarian Affairs briefing released in March of 2025, over 600 relief workers from more than 30 countries were deployed to assist Myanmar's emergency efforts. Over 100 medical units were stationed across 5 key regions, treating nearly 20,000 patients within the first month. Among them was Dr. Amina Salah, a pediatrician from Morocco. "I've delivered babies in war zones," she said, "but here, in this school-turned-clinic, I saw a mother name her newborn Tharbar, which means hope." And as aid trickled in, something began to shift. Water systems were slowly restored. Mobile clinics began visiting hard-to-reach villages. Children started attending pop-up schools in tents with donated notebooks and pencils. A makeshift chalkboard in Rakhine read, "Today's lesson, we're still here." What once felt impossible began to feel within reach. One government spokesperson said it best: "Though many challenges remain, efforts to provide relief and rebuild are being carried out step by step, with the goal of helping people return to normal life." And step by step, that's exactly what's happening. Because recovery doesn't arrive with a miracle. It comes with people, with patience, with persistence, and with partnerships that stretch across borders and beliefs. Number 5. Humanity in the rubble. Behind every headline, every statistic, and every broken wall, there's a person, a faith, a story that reminds us why these moments matter. And in Myanmar, amid the hardship, stories of quiet heroism rise, like lanterns in the dark. Let me tell you about Ma Thandar, a mother of 4, living in a temporary shelter outside of Mandalay. She lost her home, her job, and nearly everything she owned. But instead of shutting down, she chose to open up her heart and her cooking pot. Using food donations shared among the camp, she began cooking simple meals, not just for her children, but for neighboring families too. Over time, more women joined her. What started as one pot of rice became a communal kitchen, a place where people came not just for food, but for comfort. "I can't rebuild a house," she said, "but I can rebuild connection." Then there's little Naylin, just 9 years old. After the quake, he found a torn notebook buried beneath the rubble near where his school used to be. Covered in dust, the pages were still intact, and with a dull pencil he borrowed from a relief volunteer, Naylin began to teach himself again, writing his name, practicing his alphabet, and solving simple math problems, right there under a tree. Every day he returns to that same spot, determined to learn. No classroom, no desk, no uniform, just grit and a quiet dream. "I want to be a teacher," he whispered, "so I can help others like me." In a nearby village, Yunyan Tun, Mok Nguya, Dudoi Tai Run, Vangko Luum Tung Mango Tuhang Duguaya. First, and then there's Daniel, a 27-year-old volunteer from Canada. When asked why he came all the way to Myanmar, he didn't hesitate. Because when disaster strikes, borders don't matter. What matters is showing up, even if it's just to listen or hold a hand. Daniel now works with a small team delivering medical kits to isolated villages. He sleeps in a tent, eats rice and lentils twice a day, and smiles through the exhaustion. One evening, after helping deliver a baby in a candlelit temple, he wrote in his journal, "It's strange, you come here to give, but somehow, you receive much more." These are not just survivors, they are symbols of something much greater, of resilience, of courage, of unshakable hope. And their stories remind us that even in the heart of the storm, humanity shines brightest. Myanmar, after the earthquake, may look poorer in buildings, roads, and material things, but what remains is something no disaster can ever destroy: the spirit of its people. In every corner of this resilient country, you'll find stories of strength, of strangers becoming family, of children choosing hope, of communities holding on to each other through the darkest nights. This isn't just a story of loss, it's a story of what rises after. And that's what we explore here at NVL Travel Documentary: the untold truths, the quiet beauty, and the human stories that often go unseen. Because travel isn't only about seeing new places, it's about understanding lives different from our own. So if this story touched you, even just a little, feel free to leave a comment, share your thoughts, or tell us about someone who inspires you. If you'd like to walk with us on more journeys like this, consider subscribing to the channel or giving this video a gentle thumbs up. Every bit of support helps these voices reach a little further. And most of all, don't let this be the end of the story. Because somewhere out there, under a temporary roof or beside a quiet temple, someone in Myanmar is still rebuilding, still waiting, still believing that the world hasn't forgotten. Let's make sure they're right.